this is our last day studying George Washington Carver. Next week, we're going to start on seasons. So I'm going to start with some vocabulary words about George Washington Carver, and at the end, I might ask you some questions. And then today, we don't have an assignment that you have to color or paste or put together, but you're going to do a little quiz on George Washington Carver for me so I can see all that you've remembered about him. So our first vocabulary word is botany, or there's two together, botany and botanist. They go together. So George Washington Carver studied botany in college, and he became an expert botanist. Can you say the word botany? Can you say the word botanist? Botany is the study of plants and the life of plants. What do you think botanist means? So if botany is the study of plants and the life of plants, what is a botanist? Right, a botanist is someone who studies plants. An expert in botany knows a lot about all kinds of plants. Someone who studies plants is called a botanist. If you were to study botany, which plant would you like to know about first? You can tell your parents, and maybe your parents can type in the answers for you. So tell your parents about it, and when you tell them, try to use the word botany or botanist when you tell them about it. Okay, our next vocabulary word is interest. George Washington Carver had an interest in plants since he was a young child. Can you say the word interest? When you have an interest in something, that means it gets your attention and you are curious about it. Jaden has an interest in cooking. Every evening, he helps his father cook dinner. What do you have an interest in? What do you think about your interests? Tell your parents about your interest and what you do related to it. So do you study about it? Do you read about it? If it's something in science, do you do experiments? My daughter loves science, so she loves to do science experiments. And she loves dinosaurs. So for some of her birthdays, we've done dinosaur digs. So we buried little fake bones and fake dinosaurs in the sand and had her dig for them. So you can say to your parents, I have an interest in, and then you say whatever you're interested in, and I will what? What do you do with your interest? Okay, so we're going to learn some more about George Washington Carver. He's a person who loved plants. So listen carefully to find out what he did with plants and the discoveries he made with plants. So remember, his name was what? George Washington Carver. And he became famous throughout the United States as a botanist. Do you remember what a botanist is? It's a scientist who studies plants. George first developed his interest in plants as a young boy. Some people don't find out what they have interest in until they're adults, but some people find out as children. As a young child, George used his free time to explore the forest surrounding his home on a farm in Missouri. So I'll show you where Missouri is on the map. I can hold this up. It's a really big atlas I have here. It's clear in the screen there. If I can find it. Over here is Missouri. And over here is Colorado. That's where we are. We only have Kansas between us. And I'm from Iowa, which is right north of Missouri. So this is where he lived. Whoops, I'm going the wrong direction because I'm looking at my camera. So Missouri is kind of in the middle of the country. Or near the middle of the country, not exactly in the middle. So he liked to spend his free time exploring the forest surrounding his home on a farm in Missouri. He spent many hours roaming the woods, discovering all sorts of wonderful things. He liked to collect the things that caught his eye. George was especially curious about the different kinds of plants that he noticed during his explorations. He wanted to study these plants further, but he knew that if he pulled them out of the ground and took them back to the cabin, they would die. So when George found an interesting plant, he would carefully dig it up and remove it from the place that it was growing, roots and all, so that he could plant it in a special garden close to the cabin. So why do you think the plant would die if he pulled it out of the ground and took it back to his cabin? So it depends. If he pulled it out and the roots didn't come with it, then they wouldn't have the roots to collect all the nutrients, right? And if it's not in the dirt, if he didn't put it back in some dirt, it wouldn't be able to soak up water. It wouldn't be able to soak up nutrients. So even if he pulled the roots out and he didn't put it back in some dirt, it couldn't keep growing. So George moved plant after plant to this special garden where he looked after each and every plant, watering and caring for them, all to make sure that they continued to grow. As an adult, George later wrote, "I literally lived in the woods. I wanted to know every strange stone, flower, insect, bird, or beast." Do any of you have these same interests? When I was a kid, we lived on 64 acres in Iowa, and we had woods, and we called it a crick. You would call it a stream or a creek. So I loved to wander the woods when I was a kid. I didn't learn about everything that I found, but I did like to look at nature books and find out about different animals. So day after day, I spent time in the woods alone in order to collect my floral beauties. Do you know what floral means? Floral is like things with flowers, things that grow. And I put them in my little garden I had hidden in the brush not far from the house. So George was known as the plant doctor. Fascinated by the plants in his garden, George spent hours tending, observing, and studying them. In time, he came to learn about the special needs of each plant, how much water each needed, whether it grew best in the full sunlight or with some shade. George also took a special interest in caring for plants that were not growing well. He became so skillful at caring for these sick plants that people throughout the neighborhood began to call him the plant doctor. Do you know somebody else that you know that really likes plants? She works in the other kindergarten classroom, Miss Brooks. If she'll let me sometime, I might take my camera in there and show you all the plants she has in her room. She has special lights and special containers that she has them in. They're really pretty. So George also had a passion for something else. He loved painting. George's passion for plants led him to develop another talent, that of an artist. Of course, his favorite subjects to paint were his beloved plants. Though he did not have a proper canvas or paints, he improvised with what he could find. George made his first paints from different plant parts. I don't know if you remember in one of the stories we read about how it was the lady who raised him, how she taught him to make use of everything. So that's how he figured out to make paints from plant parts. He learned to use whatever he had on hand. He mashed bark, roots, and wild berries, and he used them to paint on old boards or even flat rocks. George continued to paint throughout his entire life. George was truly a remarkable and talented person. He was an excellent student who learned quickly. He went on to study at college and eventually became an expert in botany, the study of plants. After he finished college, George became a professor at a famous university in Alabama. So I think in this story it kind of skips over the time, unless I haven't got to it yet, but it skips over the time where he went to a college in Iowa. It's the college now known as Iowa State. I think back then they said it was the Agricultural College or Iowa Agricultural College or something. Now it's known as Iowa State. And my husband actually got his master's degree there, but his was in computers, not about plants. But they still have a big agricultural department there. So then, after he was in Iowa, he went to Alabama. And there he spent the rest of his life continuing to study plants and to experiment with ways to make them grow better. He discovered many ways to help farmers improve how they grew plants and crops on their farms. George encouraged farmers to grow crops other than cotton, especially peanuts and sweet potatoes. He also found many ways to use peanuts in all different types of products like dyes, oils, and makeup. He even came up with a number of recipes for foods that used peanuts. George Washington Carver is especially remembered today for these discoveries. So here are a couple of questions and another vocabulary word. So in the read aloud, you may have heard George Washington Carver discovered many ways to help farmers improve how they grew plants and crops on their farms. Can you say the word crops? Crops are plants that are grown in large numbers for people to use. So if he lived in Iowa for a while, he may have grown a lot of corn because they grow a lot of corn there. The farmer grew wheat and corn crops. Oh, said it in the next thing. I didn't read ahead. So the farmer grew wheat and corn crops for people to eat. What other types of plants do you think could be grown as crops? Like, can be grown in large amounts? You might see some of them out here. So try to use the word crops when you tell about something that might be grown in large amounts. So back where I'm from, like I said, we grew corn, they had soybeans. What else are there? Wheat, things like that can be grown as crops. And I'm sure if you grow anything, if you grow in a big amount, you can call it a crop. Okay, and I'm going to attach, along with this video, I'm going to attach a little quiz for you. It shouldn't be too hard. I'm going to give you some different options to answer the question so you can choose from those. So I just want to see how much you remember because we've been studying George Washington Carver for about a week and a half now. So that's a long time.